There are places in this world where stone remembers, where silence itself carries the weight of screams long faded. The Tower of London is one such place. Behind its ancient walls, beneath the gaze of ravens that never seem to leave, lies a patch of earth stained with the blood of queens, noblewomen, and martyrs. This is Tower Green, and what happened here wasn't just execution, it was erasure, the systematic destruction of women whose very existence threatened the crown. What you're about to hear are not fairy tales or legends. These are the true stories of women who walked through those tower gates knowing they would never leave alive, and the horrifying final moments that history tried to forget. The Tower of London was never meant to be a place of death. When William the Conqueror raised its first stones in the 11th century, it stood as a symbol of royal might, a fortress palace where kings would sleep and treasures would be stored. But power has a way of corrupting even the most solid foundations. By the time the Tudors rose to dominance, the tower had transformed into something far darker. It became a prison for those too dangerous to be seen, too valuable to be forgotten, and too threatening to be allowed to live. Within its walls, the crown held absolute authority. No crowds, no witnesses, no mercy. Executions here were reserved for the highest born, those whose deaths needed to be controlled, private, and swift. But that privacy came at a terrible cost. What happened on Tower Green was often brutal, sometimes botched, and always final. Women faced a particular kind of terror here, in a world where female power was seen as unnatural, where a woman's voice could be labeled treason and her faith called heresy. The tower became the ultimate silencer. These weren't common criminals dragged to the scaffold at Tower Hill, where crowds would jeer and throw stones. These were ladies of noble blood, relatives of kings, wives of monarchs, women who had once walked through gilded halls and now found themselves kneeling on cold stone, waiting for the blade. Their crimes varied, but the pattern remained the same. When a woman became inconvenient, when her bloodline posed a threat, when her beliefs challenged authority, the tower was waiting. And once those iron gates closed behind them, hope died, long before the body did. Among all the souls who met their end here, four women stand out, not just for their deaths, but for what their deaths reveal about power, about gender, and about the lengths a crown will go to protect itself. Their stories are not easy to hear. They are filled with terror, with innocence destroyed, and with final moments so harrowing that even hardened executioners faltered. But these stories must be told, because in the shadows of their suffering lies a truth about history that no textbook will fully capture. Power doesn't just punish the guilty, it devours anyone who stands in its way. And when that power turns its gaze toward a woman, the cruelty becomes something else entirely, something calculated, something personal. If you're ready to walk with me through these stories, to stand witness to what happened on that blood-soaked green, then subscribe now, because what comes next will stay with you long after this video ends. Let's begin with the youngest victim of them all, a girl who wore a crown for 9 days and paid for it with her life. Lady Jane Grey was 16 years old when they told her she would be queen. She wept, not from joy, but from terror, because even at that tender age, she understood what the crown truly was. It wasn't power, it was a target. Jane was brilliant, fluent in multiple languages, devoted to her Protestant faith and utterly unprepared for the venomous world of Tudor politics. When the sickly King Edward VI died in 1553, Protestant nobles scrambled to prevent his Catholic half-sister, Mary, from taking the throne. They chose Jane, a distant cousin with royal blood, and forced the crown onto her head. She ruled for 9 days before Mary's supporters rallied and tore her from power. Jane was arrested and locked in the Tower, a prisoner at 16, waiting to see if mercy or death would come first. For months, she waited. Mary initially spared her, perhaps seeing in Jane's youth and reluctance a mirror of innocence. But politics knows no mercy. When rebels rose up in 1554, trying to restore Jane to the throne, Mary's hand was forced. Jane had done nothing, said nothing, supported nothing, but her existence was enough. Her bloodline made her dangerous. Her faith made her a symbol. And so, on a cold February morning, Jane Grey was led to Tower Green, dressed in black, clutching a prayer book like it could save her. Witnesses said she walked calmly, her voice steady, as she proclaimed her innocence and accepted her fate. But when the executioner told her to kneel, when the blindfold covered her eyes, that composure shattered. Blinded, disoriented, Jane reached forward, groping desperately for the block. Her hands swept through empty air. She cried out, her voice breaking with panic. What shall I do? Where is it? Where is it? Someone from the crowd, unable to bear the sight of her terror, guided her trembling hands to the wood. She laid her head down, and then the axe fell. England, as 9-day queen, died, not for crimes she committed, but for being born into a world where innocence was no shield against the machinery of power. But Jane's death was swift compared to what Margaret Pole would endure. The Countess of Salisbury had survived wars, outlived kings, and reached her late 60s, carrying the blood of the Plantagenet dynasty. That blood, once a badge of honor, became her death sentence when her son, Cardinal Reginald Pole, denounced King Henry VIII from the safety of Rome. Henry's paranoia turned murderous. Margaret was arrested without trial, held in the Tower for 2 years, and then dragged to the block in 1541. She refused to lay her head down. She proclaimed her innocence to the bitter end. And what followed was not an execution, but a butchery. The executioner, inexperienced and trembling, missed. He struck again and again. It took multiple blows to end her life, each one a testament to the crown's willingness to inflict suffering upon even the elderly and the innocent. Then there was Anne Askew, a woman whose crime was faith, a scholar who dared to read scripture, a Protestant in a realm teetering between Reformation and tradition. Anne was arrested, interrogated, and when she refused to name others, they did the unthinkable. They tortured her on the rack, something never before done to a woman of noble birth. Her body was so broken that she couldn't stand. On the day of her execution, she was carried to the stake in a chair, tied upright, and burned alive at Smithfield. While the flames consumed her, she remained silent, her faith unshaken, even as her flesh turned to ash. And finally, there was Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of Henry VIII, a teenage girl thrust into queenship with no preparation and no protection. Accused of adultery, Catherine was arrested and brought to the Tower in 1541. Some say she spent her final night practicing how to lay her head on the block. rehearsing her own death like an actress preparing for a role. On February 13th, 1542, she walked to Tower Green and knelt. The axe fell. She was buried near her cousin, Anne Boleyn, another queen destroyed by the same king. 2 women, 2 executions, both erased for threatening the ego of a tyrant. These 4 women, Jane, Margaret, Anne, and Catherine, were not villains. They were victims of a system that valued control over compassion, power over justice. Their deaths weren't anomalies, they were warnings. The Tower of London didn't just execute traitors, it erased inconveniences, and the cost of that erasure was measured in the blood of women who dared to exist in a world that saw them as expendable. Their stories linger in those cold stones, whispered by the wind that sweeps across Tower Green. If their suffering teaches us anything, it's this: history is written by the powerful, but it's felt by the powerless. So, I ask you now, knowing what you know, what do these deaths reveal about the true nature of power? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because these women deserve to be remembered not as footnotes, but as the souls they were: flawed, frightened, and utterly human.